Welcome to Action Against Stunting Day. I'm Claire. I thought we'd start with introductions around the room very briefly, and then we'll go online to see who's with us. Can I start with Jill on this side?
Okay, thanks, Claire. Hi everyone, I'm Jill Jones. I work for the Medical Council, which is part of UKRI, which funded the Action Against Stunting Hub.
Hello, I'm Rosie Cooper. I'm the Policy and Campaigning Officer with the focus on nutrition for the Sustainable Development Goal 2 Advocacy Hub. So we focus more on the advocacy campaigning across agriculture, nutrition, food security, biodiversity, and the like. Thanks for having me today. Thank you.
I'm Saul Morris. I'm Director of Programmes at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, based here in London. We work on food systems.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alok. I'm the Director of Programs and Investments at the Power of Nutrition. Really looking forward to the conversation today, and thanks for the invite.
Hi, I'm Kit McMahon. I'm the Policy and Parliamentary Advocacy Officer for Nutrition at Results UK and provide Secretariat for the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Nutrition for Development.
Hi, my name is Marie McGrath. I'm a Technical Director at Emergency Nutrition Network, which is a UK-based charity doing international work to build sort of grounded evidence for policy, research and practice. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Sabah and I'm from Pakistan. And I came to drop off my son for the college, and I'm so she's not here today.
I brought my mate.
I'm glad I'm here.
Hello, I'm Terry Sarch. I lead the nutrition team at the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office.
Hi, I'm Professor Lin Ang. I'm from the UCL Institute of Education, and my colleague and I lead the education and cognition work stream of the Hub.
I'm Callum Northcote. I'm the head of Hunger and Nutrition at Save the Children, part of our global policy advocacy and research team, and the vice chair of the Sons of Civil Society Network.
And hello, I'm Rachel, and I'm partner on the Hub. I work for a company called Science Made Simple. We are science communicators, so I'm the public engagement partner on the Hub, and this is a public engagement exercise, for which I can take no credit at all.
Yes, you can.
So hello everyone, I'm Yashika and I'm the Communications Officer for the Hub, and I've been sending all those emails to you back and forth. So I am so thankful and glad that everyone has made here. Thank you for taking out the time, and I hope you enjoy the conversations and these prove to be fruitful and valuable for you all. Stephen?
Hi everyone, my name is Stephen. I'm the Senior Hub Manager working with Claire.
Hi, I'm Dinesh. I'm the MEL Officer for Action Against Stunting Hub and partly the tech person for them.
Morning, everyone. I'm Tracy Gogan. I work for the Nutrition Society. I run the Secretariats for the International Union of Nutritional Sciences, the Federation of European Nutrition Societies, and our newly launched all-party parliamentary group on nutrition science.
Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Fidas. I work for Continental White, which is a Canadian organization. I'm the Senior Policy Officer for Hunger and Nutrition. I also chair the International Union of Nice to meet you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ella Holter.
Hello. It's a big meeting.
I'm the Partnerships Manager for Independent Practicing.
Hi all, I'm Deb Sharma. I'm a youth MP in the UK Youth Parliament and a founding member of Fight Back 2030, which is a youth-led food movement co-founded by Jamie Oliver. I'm currently chairing the UK Parliament's Youth Select Committee, which is a youth-led inquiry into the cost of
your protected view begin files from the internet.
So we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so should we go online and do a very quick intros online for the online audience? We've got someone. Babakar.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Babakar Faye from Senegal. I'm a country lead of the hub here in Senegal, and I'm very happy to be here for this third stunting day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Babakar. Ella? Okay, Stephen Allen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Allen. I'm a paediatric gastroenterologist, and I'm the lead for the gut health workstream for the Hub. Thank you.
And I think the NIN India team is probably, oh, good, we've got Oh, there's Sunitha. Hello, Sunitha.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon from India. I'm Deepak. I'm a part of Hub and along with my team at IPH Gandhinagar, leading the Gujarat arm of the study. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Deepak. Go ahead, Sunitha.
Hi, I'm Sunitha Kadiala. I'm Professor of Global Nutrition at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I work on the food systems theme of the Hub.
Abigail?
Hi, everybody. I'm Abby Perry. I'm the Director of Nutrition for the World Food Programme. I was previously Head of Nutrition for DFID during the early stages of this initiative, so it's great to be part of the discussion today. Thanks.
Great. Is there anyone else online? Oh, there's Arianta?
Yeah, so
Anumi?
I'm Dr. Rajendra Rao from India, epigenetic country lead. So I'm along with PDRA, so Dr. Swati. Hi.
Hello. Hello.
We have Umi.
Yeah, Umi and Arianta.
Umi, can you introduce yourself? Please. Maybe she can't sometimes. Connections.
Dr. Irma.
Audio is down.
Yeah, Arianta, can you hear us? So the Indonesia team, we can bring you back later for a quick introduction. Tapasvi?
Hi, Deepak has introduced. So I'm Tapasvi Puar from IPH Gandhinagar, Gujarat team. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Irma? No, Dinesh, is there anyone else? Wow. Okay. Okay, Chelsea, we're not going to introduce you again. How are you? Okay.
So I think it's probably worthwhile saying that if we're in the room, we should make sure we try to speak slowly and loudly and clearly. Channel your inner Dev. He was marvelous. Yeah.
Okay. So I thought, we're already a few minutes. I'm going to just very quickly kind of do a little bit of scene setting, and then I'm going to turn over to session 1. Okay, and see if we can get a good dialogue going. Okay, so Action Against Stunting Day has been going on for 3 years. In our first year, we managed to reach about 30 million people, and that was a shock to us. We were like, that's really remarkable. We learned a lot, but really the hard work of our country teams. So this year, we've got a lot of engagement with media, with national, regional television, radio, with the India team. We've got a stunting awareness program that's going off on state TV in Hyderabad. Gujarat State in India has recognized September 8th as Action Against Stunting Day. They've also engaged through their satellite communication TV program created for 50,000 Anganwadi workers across Gujarat State. So these are people that are at the front line of children who are stunted. Done a huge amount, the team in Indonesia, community engagement, particularly working on this importance of fathers in childcare, doing a lot of work with local newspapers. After this, we're having local policy workshops and engagement events in India, Indonesia, and Senegal. And we've had We Value workshops with local health workers and politicians and policymakers in Indonesia. And in Indonesia, there's a secondary school competition. So it has been a remarkable set of activities, and we hope to reach as wide an audience as possible through Hub. So thank you, teams. So what are our aims today? So we want to explore how a renewed policy environment can stop this backsliding against these nutritional targets. Possible? Can we do it? We want to unpack how research can better support these efforts, and we want to identify the gaps, the challenges, the opportunities with. So we have a small amount of time. We have a lot of experts. So I think that I think we can come quite far today. Okay, next slide, please. Now, I don't know if we can see that, but we've had decades of targets for child nutrition. Decades and decades. Okay, they weren't that explicated in the Millennium Development Goals, but they were still there. World Health Assembly came in 2012 to 2025, 2015 to 2030. We've got the SDGs, we've got the Africa 2063 targets, we've got the 2050 vision. So we're very good on targets. Now, but when you look at what we've done We've done so from 2000 to 2015. In 2015, there was 159 million stunted children. That was the estimate. Now, if we go to the World Health Assembly targets, and we said we end today, there's 148 million stunted children. So it's not a huge. We haven't done a great job, I think. It's not a huge number. So if we go to the next slide, please.
Sorry, just a quick interruption. The slides aren't moving online.
Oh, hang on. We'll see if we can share that again. Sorry, guys. We're just going over the decades of targets, and it's you know them. So, yeah, from the MDGs to the WHAs, and now there's a lot of, and then this term backsliding is now in the discourse, and it's used in the discourse to discuss the MDGs in particular and why we're not meeting some of these goals. So there's a number of reasons, and they're very significant. We've got the pandemic, we've got a food systems crisis, we've got a climate crisis, but health system inequalities, we've got global income inequalities. And all of this, and this is what's exciting, is now informing what we're terming this like new transitions agenda. Oops, that's okay. If we go back, that's okay, one more, yeah. This new transition agenda about transforming food systems and healthcare. There's been a number of big, there's been the UN Food Systems Summit, there's been looking at the UN Food Systems Summit +2, where are we? There's been this big, what's happening in Tanzania today. So there's a lot of very positive movements. So we think that the policy environment is inevitably going to change. So next slide. Now we've also had decades of research, and this is really interesting. So if you look at the number of articles that were published on child stunting, and this isn't, it's, we haven't drilled through this. This is just very much looking at PubMed. If you had child stunting in the abstract or mentioned, there's 14,730 in this 15-year period. But when you look to the evidence that's being created, systematic reviews, clinical trials, meta-analysis, it's a really minor number of pieces of work. SDGs, let's take that time period. Again, better, we're getting more papers, more articles. But again, systematic review meta-analysis is, again, it's much lower. So we can say we've got these very, very ambitious targets, and we can look at the research community and say, maybe we're not informing enough of what's happening. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So we think that policy occupies the space between these targets and the research. And, should we include the policy environment as a key reason for some of this backsliding? And I'm being a little bit contentious here because it's a round table and we want to just unpack these things. So today's session, we've got 3 sessions. So the first one, we're going to have our participants talk about this transitions agenda and what does it mean for child malnutrition? Because when you go to these big conferences, we don't hear a lot about the sort of end users. We don't hear a lot about child nutrition. We don't hear about who's using it down the road. Session 2, we've got the country perspectives, but a right variety of stakeholders in Hub and from the minister down. So we, welcome, thank you, the Indonesia team. And session 3 is like, let's see if we can move forward. What can we do? What are the barriers? How can we access the levers? So that was my piece. And now I'm going to turn over to the speakers of session 1. And we've got 5-ish minutes, if you want to say more, 5-ish minutes. And then we'll open up the floor to discussion, and we'll open up the discussion on, of course, the people who are joining us online. So is that solved online? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so who wants to start in session 1?
Sure.
I'll be in charge of the 5 minutes.
Got promoted. I jumped from last to first. How wonderful.
Great, thank you very much. Well, you gave us 2 questions to think about. The first was, what actions can we take to ensure that these key issues relating to child malnutrition can better inform the current debate on transforming global food systems? And then another one around more specifically on the backsliding. So on the actions, I'm sure that at a high level, I have 3 big sets of actions, which I imagine fit in fairly well with what other people are thinking. I hope so anyway. The first one is around our understanding of what needs to change, which you would think with after 14,000 articles, we would be a long way away along that, but I think I'll try and make the point that there's still more to be done there. The second is about raising the profile of the issue and bringing in new actors. And again, you showed us just now the efforts that have been made to raise the profile of the issue, but it doesn't really feel like that when you hit country level, to be honest. I can't say I'm every day meeting people who think that stunting is top of the policy agenda. And the third one is about supporting national pathway development, thinking about food systems. We've been talking about national pathways for food systems evolution or transformation and how that's going to be implemented. So what are some of the kind of things under each of those? So under understanding, not all foods are equal for stunting. Some foods are much more relevant than others to solve the stunting problem. And so we really need to get clear on that level of prioritization. And some of Gaines' work about a set of work that we've done called comprehensive nutrient gap assessment, I think goes some way towards that, but there's still more to be done to get consensus on that. Similarly, not all policies are equal. Some are much more relevant for solving this problem than others, and the kind of analysis that needs to go into that is really quite tricky because it needs to model the entire system and to look at all of the feedback loops that you get in systems. We need to know more about what programs are working, and we need, very importantly, to diagnose policy incoherence. That's a new one. We haven't really looked at that very much. What you see in most places is incredibly incoherent policies. One arm of one policy pulling in one direction, another policy pulling in exactly the opposite direction. No clear sense as to how to reconcile that. On raising the profile, we've seen efforts like Standing Together for Nutrition. I think that was a good one. Particularly came out of the COVID pandemic. I think that was very useful. And I think now we're beginning to move towards some kind of workable ask for the private sector. Everybody that I've ever met gets their food from the private sector. They don't receive it from government. And so somehow we need a workable ask for the private sector to do something useful to contribute to this. And I think the Zero Hunger Pledge, for example, is a good example of trying to come up with asks that are workable. And on the pathway development, I think a key thing that I see when on my travels is the challenge that countries have to prioritize. You get these wonderful documents that have 30 different actions or 50 different actions around food systems transformation, but no sense of what's prioritized, and I think that's incredibly important. We need to help ministries reconcile their priorities. I was just in Rwanda, which I think is really a leading country on the battle against stunting, but their ag ministry has a very different set of priorities from their health ministry. And frankly, they won't lead to the same outcomes in terms of stunting. So somehow we have to help those ministries reconcile those different priorities. And something very dear to me is ensuring that social protection is integral to all of these pathways, especially when we look at the second issue, which is about the backsliding. We recognize that on the rather pessimistic side, what determines the course of stunting more than anything are these big global issues, which are looking really grim. Food prices, conflict, the environment, and how that's linked to consumption of animal source foods, gender issues. None of these seem to be going in the right direction at the moment. And those are the things that are going to really fundamentally determine stunting. So that is a little pessimistic. But on the positive side, two things to raise on that. Firstly, it is possible to work with ministries to help them see their role in shaping nutrition outcomes. As we've said, many other ministries, other than ministries of health, don't see their role as being involved in shaping nutrition outcomes, but that's something that we can change. And the other thing that I think is particularly relevant on the child's nutrition side is that we see more and more children around the world eating a diet that consists largely at this point of snacks, sugary, salty snacks, and ultra-processed foods. And this has kind of caught all of us, from my generation at least, by surprise. These were not the nutrition problems that we were dealing with at the beginning of my career, but it's a real problem now. But on the positive side, it can be regulated, it can be changed. That's something that we can take action against.
Thank you, Saul. That's great. And thank you. In the interest of going backwards, since we started with Saul, Alan, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I get it. And the benefit of going second is there's already amazing points I can basically just say, and like Saul said. So, I mean, I think in answer to the first question on the actions that can be taken, I think the most important thing to recognise at the global level, which is most often where I'm working from a policy base, is so crowded. And the point around these big global conferences, nutrition's not on the table. We spend a lot of time trying to get nutrition on the table, so know how challenging that can be. For example, we've got UNGA next week where we'll be going, and I spend a lot of my time inputting into people's briefings and nutrition. That's even within Save the Children. I'm sure it's the case for many others in here. And then when you get that onto the platform, it's even harder to kind of see it all to come together. So I think we have to recognise that, but then also stunting is a crowded space as well. And I think the point around the private sector engagement is so key. Governments are on election cycles. Governments are going to end in 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, potentially. And so if we're looking at creating the change we want to make for stunting, we have to think way beyond that, because that is not going to be, they're not going to be the key partner in creating long-standing policy, which is having long-standing changes, because you're not going to see a change in an election cycle on stunting. And so I think that's a really key thing to remember when we go into these crowded spaces. Who are the different actors there that we can engage with? That maybe we're not talking as much around consumers and driving demand. Maybe we're not talking around producers and what they're selling, and businesses and how they're shaping that space as well. So I think that's worth thinking through. But in terms of concrete actions, I think that this group can take, I think there's 3 probably quite clear things. First, it's like I feel there's a need to educate. All of the articles you've identified, thousands of different things that have come out over the last few years. But if you walked out onto the street and asked somebody in Bloomsbury Square what's stunting, they wouldn't know what it was. They wouldn't have a concept around that. They would know what measles was. They would know what things, other kind of health interventions that they maybe have experienced. But they've not experienced it in the developed world. And so therefore, if we assume that that's where a lot of power sits, whether it's governments, whether it's multinational businesses, there isn't the understanding of the problem, so therefore we need to educate. But we have to educate in a way that's understandable, and we are, in nutrition, I think, horrendous at talking about what our problem is. We make it very complicated, we make it very difficult, and so a policymaker leaves with 50 different things to do because you've given them 50 different things to do, and then they don't know any of them, or they do the most suboptimal one. So education, I think, is a really key part in this. And demonstrating the scale of the problem. We have a great tool that we use at Save the Children, which Abby was involved in creating, the cost of the diet tool, which is an easy way of demonstrating to different stakeholders what different diets cost in different regions and how much they're increasing depending on price changes. And you can all imagine that the one that's increasing the most is the nutritionally relevant, culturally relevant diet. How do we get that information and share that more readily? I think we also need to be better at demonstrating that we have the solutions as well. And again, it's not something that we're often able to do. I think maybe in wasting, it's a bit easier. We can talk about treating wasting very simply. As soon as you get to preventing wasting, though, we tie ourselves in knots again in the same way that we kind of do around stunting. But we need to be clear on what those solutions are going to be. And that's going to have to be done in a way in which we're confident enough to make mistakes, but we're also elevating the things that we know are working. And so as we're doing that, we need to then turn the solutions into everyone's problems. And I think the social protection example is a key one here. If you think about social protection, we know it can be effective for stunting. We also know that if you're somebody concerned about child poverty generally, you think social protection is important. If in some countries you have to pay to access medicine, we know that you think social protection is important. So we shouldn't be thinking about, we need to be working with those people and having a social protection case, with which stunting is a key element of that. If we recognize that's going to elevate policy change. Moving away from siloed nutrition things that we think about cross-sectorally, but actual general cross-sectoral pieces of work. We do that in some of our programming, so people might be familiar with some of the work that we do in Bangladesh, the Sushana program, and the Maziko program in Malawi, where we've worked with Power of Nutrition on, both of which bring in elements of this multi-sectoral programming. And I think as well, in talking about making it everyone's problem, that doesn't mean we need everyone to be a stunting advocate. We need to, and I think the pandemic is a kind of an example that I was thinking about when I was thinking about today. The pandemic became everyone's problem, not necessarily because they were concerned about their own health, but they were concerned about their business reopening or their mental health or not seeing somebody. And so ending it was vital. Stunting isn't in there, and it's never going to be at that level of extreme, of course. But how can we attach stunting to somebody who cares about profit, first and foremost? And again, hopefully not stealing Power of Nutrition's interventions, but the work that you've done demonstrating actually to businesses, this matters. If your concern is profit, your concern should be stunting. We need to be much better at that, because not everybody is going to consider stunting is important in its own right. So I think we need to be better partners if we want to change the policy scenario. And the answer to the second question of can we be more effective? Yes, we've got to be better. We can't just go up to climate money and ask for it. We need to offer something back in return, which is elevating the whole total finance available. We can just, again, talk about social protection for stunting or talk about behavior change, but only think about it for accessing nutritious foods. So how can we be a better partner? And that's the challenge that I'd love to hear people thinking through today and get ideas about from a nutrition side, so that we're not the ones knocking on the door begging, but we're actually offering a partnership approach, which would not just elevate the stunting returns we want to see, but the wider implications too.
Thank you. That's a great segue to have.
Thanks. So it's really difficult to add more on top of what Saul and mentioned, but
It's all right, because they took your time.
So in terms of the first question was around malnutrition. So just looking at malnutrition, it's around stunting, it includes wasting, and it also focuses on the overnutrition. So I do feel when we look at nutrition, the linking with the food systems on that aspect, there are few nuances which is very different for wasting, few nuances which is very different for stunting, and few nuances which is very different for the overweight and overnutrition component. For wasting, there are existing solutions available. Can we look at food systems helping a more localized aspect of solving for that, instead of it just being something which is a global solution being imported? Can there be that kind of an approach, localized solution in a sustainable manner for wasting is something that I would suggest. For chronic malnutrition, then we look at stunting. If you just break it down in terms of what is the age group where that happens, preconception, maternal nutrition, as well as when you look at the first 2 years. The way food systems can help address would be very different in each one of these life cycle stages, and in preconception, maternal nutrition, and the first 2 years. I think the first 2 years is where it's not accessibility or availability that is the biggest driver. That it's more about the behavior change and how much of focus from the food systems and nutrition discussion are happening on those behavior change. How many resources are available globally? I think the behavior change resources are dwindling down in a very fast rate at this point of time. And overnutrition, both Saul and Callum mentioned about it, that it's something that processed high fat, high sugar content, and these are something which can be dealt with a very strong policy angle being brought into the discourse. Second aspect on your first question is where food systems and nutrition comes together. I would say, unfortunately, food systems and stakeholders in the area of food systems don't take due credit of what their work leads to in terms of the better nutritional outcome. And if they start taking credit for that, whether it is in terms of the diversification of agriculture that they talk about, or smallholder farmer involved livelihood, linking with climate. Climate is an amazing way of linking food systems, nutrition, and the whole climate agenda. But they talk about food systems. Is there a way that they can take credit for what that work leads to in terms of nutrition as well? They don't do that, and this is what always for nutrition for the last decade or so has been about mainstreaming nutrition into other sectors. That's, I would say, a missed opportunity. like if you look at the example of this being a year of millets, that's in itself an example where it is leading to something the food systems is doing, but it has an impact for the better nutrition outcome as well. Third aspect on your question one is, I would say, looking at partnerships and collaborations. We at the Power of Nutrition function that way. That's what we do with funders and implementing partners and all. But what it takes is bringing different funders together from different sectors. There are funders who are interested in nutrition outcome, but only with this sector. There are other funders who are interested in nutrition outcome, but only with this sector. It's not nutrition with food systems or nutrition with early childhood development or nutrition with health. A mother and child diet, they encounter all these things at the same point of time. But then it is not divided across sectors. It's something that we funders, implementers, and the development partners, we break it in those silos, and very rightly said, we need to come out of those silos. And in that also, when we say partnership and collaboration, it's important to look at from the angle of not just funders, implementers, government at the national level, at the local level, and the private sector players as well. There's this whole massive drive for the ESG agenda. The amount of resources that's available in the ESG agenda, it's humongous. And food systems is a key component which can help siphon off some of the ESG resources for better nutrition outcome, which I think is not being done at the scale that it can be done. For the second question, I'll be a bit controversial here. I do feel, Claire, you mentioned about policy, research, and targets. I think the biggest thing that's missing here is the implementation. There are so many papers on research. There will be endless research coming out in the years ahead as well. It will not make a change. Policies, you first talked about all those goals that we have set. Yes, there is lack of nutrition sitting on a lot of discourse that's happening at the global level. It is getting deprioritized, but go to any country, the policies on paper are there. So I would not say the policy environment is very weak. I say yes, there are opportunities we can strengthen, and we have targets. But what will help us achieve those targets are the implementation, and that's where the focus needs to be prioritized. And can our policy be implementation driven? Can policy start looking at bringing ministries together, having a common results framework across those countries? Look at the Sekota Declaration in Ethiopia. They look at the work that's happening in Indonesia right now, where right from the presidents and vice presidents level, there is this ownership around stunting, and different ministries are accountable to report to that. And when we look at the health system strengthening the 6 pillars, can we look at food systems and nutrition through those 6 pillars approach? Yeah, and last but not the least, looking at this evidence to policy to action continuum, I would also say that the agenda for policy has to be generated from the localized voices and not based on what funders or implementers think is the agenda for the policy over there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So Abby?
Thanks very much. Probably the disadvantage of going fairly far down the list of speakers is that there has been an awful lot mentioned so far, all of which I think is really fundamental in this question. So I'm basically going to scrap everything else that I had thought that I was going to say and just focus on a couple of points. In sort of no particular order against the questions. The first thing I want to note is that it's just as much as anything, and this is a bit awkward on a session which is called Action Against Stunting. It's just the first one is about this conceptualization of stunting itself. So, stunting is an extraordinarily helpful smoke detector or fire alarm, and that is not my analogy. I've heavily stolen it from somebody else. But what the fire is extraordinarily complex and can be very, very different by context. And so when it comes to this question around whether it's around an effective policy environment or whether it's around the actions that could be taken, I think there is something incredibly important about coming back to how we use a concept like stunting to drive dialogue discussion about, in effect, lack of progress around development more broadly, because of the fact that stunting can be the result of mental health crises, the massive maternal depression that we're not able to deal with very well. It can be because early child development is extraordinarily limited due to a whole range of factors. It can be because of poor quality diets. It can be because of women's absolute fundamental inequality in many countries around the world. I think continuing to really push for it to be understood as a very central outcome that is a barometer of multiple dimensions of inclusive, equal development is something that I think remains incredibly fundamental. And that kind of sense of ownership of the agenda well beyond the nutrition community, well beyond anybody who thinks about what anybody eats, in fact, remains, I think, incredibly important. And obviously, initiatives like the World Bank's Human Capital Development Index, I think, has been helpful to try to reposition the kind of understanding and appreciation of what this represents. But I think there's still much more to do to help people really properly understand that this is not an issue that is owned by or the responsibility of nutritionists sitting there looking at nutritional content of diets. We are part of that story very clearly. As Callum mentioned, we know that access to affordable, nutritious diets remains extraordinarily difficult around many places around the world, and that provides a very fundamental barrier to good growth and development. But we need to, as others have said, take it out of that box and really make sure that what stunting is, what it represents, is much more centrally placed. And that brings me to my second point, and then I'm not going to make any other points, I've decided, is that for me, so much of this comes back to the political economy of good nutrition and the importance of ensuring that everybody really understands what's at stake in the here and now and in the long run. And again, there has been an enormous focus on this at points during our nutrition journey. What was really groundbreaking about the 2008 Lancet series was that point about linking stunting to economic growth, economic development, and so on. But the politics around food systems still fundamentally comes back to, and I think this came through very strongly in the stock-taking moment a couple of months ago here in Rome, the food systems discussions is still back to the political economy as food systems of drivers of jobs, livelihoods, economic growth, and maybe to a degree at this point in time, environmental impacts and the environmental sustainability. So really getting to grips with this idea of how poor nutrition undermines economies, poor nutrition costs health services a lot of money, undernutrition ensures you have an unhealthy workforce, and really centering that back in again, I think is such a very fundamental argument. And I totally agree that we'll need to do something very radical to kind of re-engage and engage people themselves on this idea of what they, from when really just looking at it from the more narrow dimension of this story around diets and what people eat, to really empower people in a much more engaging way around what they're entitled to, what is not a nice to have, it's an essential. It's not an aspiration to eat a healthy, nutritious diet. It is an essential to being a healthy, productive human being, and what people are calling for, what people are demanding, that to kind of reframe that in a really kind of very fundamental way. But the political economy cannot be forgotten in all of this, because whether we like it or not, the world revolves around people wanting to make money and understanding how that influences power, politics and decision making is something that we have to really try and work out how to engage with, even where for academic or research entities it's about enabling data, statistics, evidence to pump into those policy dialogues and debates. Because right now, I'd love to see some kind of, much greater focus on the concept of equity, on the concept that we shouldn't be putting economic growth and the profits of businesses over and above people's health. But the climate change agenda has demonstrated to us that that will happen every single day and is going to continue to happen. So we really need to fight in the same way that the folks on the climate change side are fighting, to point out that this is fundamental to the future of humankind, not just something of a bunch of nutritionists sitting in the corner telling people what they should eat. Not that that's what anybody around the table is likely to be doing, I'm sure, because you're all much more enlightened than that. So those are the like I said, off the back of some many excellent points that I would echo what's in the room. Those are just the two final points I wanted to highlight from my side. Thanks.
Thanks, Abby. Was it really, we've had so many different kind of disparate, but there's been some really coherent things that have come across. This essentially, we're not very joined up. We're in a vacuum of non-joining. And Abby, kind of what you were talking about is something the hub feels very dearly about, looking at the whole child approach. So our remit from the very beginning was that all stunted children are not the same. They live in different environments. We need to kind of capture that holistically, but how that could be mirrored into sort of the policy environments, we haven't really considered, but it seems that might be useful. But go ahead, for our speakers and for the audience, what are your thoughts? And go ahead.
Thank you. I'm in session 3, so I think I'll probably have nothing left to say by the time everyone's gone around the table. But I just wanted to, it's picking up on what Verity have said, and Abby, I think, in particular as well, is that, and something that came up, what do you mean by nutrition outcomes? What do you mean, like, whether a child is stunted or not, doesn't matter whether they're tall or small, it's a marker of risk that's maybe indicative of nutrition problems, but not exclusively so. And I think a few people said, other people contributing towards our nutrition outcomes. Really, it's functional outcomes, it's survival, it's growth, it's development, it's thriving that we're looking for, immediate and long terms. And we share those across all, you're saying the Ministry of Agriculture, that's what they're going to be intending to do. They're not going to try and make children die. They're going to be trying to make them survive, etc. And I think sometimes we see this in the wasting community. We're seeing it in stunting, where we focus on the anthropometric indicator really as a nutrition outcome. It's not. It's just a measure. And I think we're completely missing a trick in somehow framing and sometimes being able to focus on an issue, but not to the exclusion of, and seeing it as the ultimate outcome. Whether your child's wasted or not, stunted or not, is not an outcome. It's an indicator that you may be on the way there. And so I think there needs to be some sort of way of somehow identifying the common goals, being able to work in your different areas collectively to deliver those, because we're way behind on SDGs, on wasting, on stunting or whatever, and we need to be joining forces on this. So I think, and then that just relates to the target and looking at the whole of child approach. And I was looking at that, I thought, and I'm very involved with the wasting world, I said, I could just label that wasting. What's the difference? Okay, there's nuances here and there, but there's such commonality, and yet you've got all of these people working in the multiple policies, and they are not connecting or colliding. And I think the context is so critical, both at the household level all the way up. And what you were saying about it's country-driven policy, and there's not enough, the research that you presented, systematic reviews, meta-analysis, clinical trials, great, that's not the research we need. And I sat in with the Lancet Small Vulnerable Newborn series, and they did mega analysis on the things to scale up. And I remember in the panel, Rahul from Gates, people were asked what were their surprises, and he said, actually, I was a bit disappointed there was no surprises, because it's all things we know, and what's lacking is the how. And you talk, I think, on your website about the magic, is there a magic bullet? Everyone's looking, but like bullets do harm. And I've seen, wasting is not sorted. There isn't a solution to wasting. There's ready-to-use food. There's no scale on wasting management. And this obsession with the magic bullet and without looking at implementation and reality on the ground has hampered wasting progress. So I'll stop now because I will go on forever, and I know I've got bitten, but I just wanted to throw a few things out there.
Yeah, no, the magic bullet was why we started the hub, because there is no magic bullet. And there's an obsession in research to find the answer, to find the solution. but that's not the way we're gonna find a solution. So I absolutely agree with you. Things need to be much more joined up and much more holistic, and I think the whole child approach can bring us that, but can we mirror that within a policy environment? I don't know. So as a research environment, it's been spectacularly successful, but you know, what does it do at scale? Yeah, and it's this implementation space. And so we're generating knowledge, a lot of knowledge. It's very difficult to access that knowledge for most people working in the field, or it can be very politicized knowledge where, you know, this is a great research group, whereas this other, where the solution might be over here. I wrote a paper maybe 15 years ago on mosaics. I'm looking at a problem of what's been done, what hasn't been done, what's left to do, and kind of what's the mosaic? How do you fill it in? I don't think anybody read it.
So I'll stop now, but just to say, just to challenge, we're generating knowledge. We're not, the knowledge is on the ground. They're the ones, what is the knowledge they have? What is the knowledge they need? And they're the architects. And that's always when I think this is a real problem we have globally, sometimes that we say, we generate the knowledge, we generate the policies here. And we somehow, and then we can play like this game, you know. I think that's where the knowledge is, and
absolutely.
You know, we don't have it.
Yeah, no. But it's when I say we, I'm talking about the research community, and that's global. And that's, you know, everyone. That's not just people sitting in the same kind of London. Yeah. So I mean, no, I'm sort of with you on that. But how do we take this back? So what are your thoughts on this? What do we?
I really liked that idea of the fire alarm. I hadn't heard that analogy before, actually, and for me it really works, because your solution that you work on when you hear a fire alarm is not to go away and study fire alarms and understand how they work, and then maybe think my top priority is to stop the fire alarm. I'll like disconnect the electricity so that it doesn't make this irritating noise. But you then you look for the fire. So I thought that might be a very useful, actually, analogy to push out a little bit more in the public communications arena. I do think that there's danger with the, you know, I'm delighted that the agenda around food systems has come up, because that's what we work on at GAIN, so that's wonderful. But there is a bit of there's always a danger that as you look at policy coherence for food systems transformation, how is that then going to link in with the necessary other sectors that have to complement that and fit in doing their part also in order for some of these long-term outcomes to be changed? So that's a concern. We can, every time we shift the focus to try and get coherence in one area, there's a risk that you might break a link somewhere else. And that requires a superhuman effort to try and overcome that one. I really don't know how you do that.
So, Sally, what do you think?
So if there's one thing that can make a change, I feel it is political ownership on an agenda around this. We have seen country by country who have been able to implement a lot of programs, say around immunization or different health components or WASH. Or if there is political willingness to do a thing, country, government, ministries, departments, they find a way of doing that. Since nutrition, and going back to Callum's point, for a government, will it help them come back in the next election? Because nutrition is not, the stunting as an outcome is not tangible in 1 or 2 years timeline. All the effort that you put in, it will give you an impact for 5, 6 years down the line. You already are entering an election by that time. So if it is anchored into a human development, kind of the thing that Abby referred to, the way World Bank has been pushing for it, and if that in terms of the demographic dividend of that as an outcome, those are the things that the political landscape would align more with. And then for them to look at that angle and create different ministries accountable through that governance mechanism. Without that, let's make, there are 40,000 research articles, let's make 40,000. Let's have it as a, so there has been, like, you enumerated in your first slide, so many goals. Let's have 15 more goals around 150 more years down the line. But till the time the government implementation machinery gears up to get that done, we can keep making targets, we can keep doing research, we can keep making policies. It will never change.
What happens if you have political will to do two directly opposite things? So I see in many countries, ministries of agriculture, they want to push smallholder farming towards export crops. And I totally understand why they would want to do that. They want to create wealth in the rural sector. But that we know what impact that will have on nutrition. And at the same time, you have Ministry of Health, who is really keen on pushing forward programs on stunting. But the two things are just completely incompatible. How do you resolve that?
So the Shepherd Center for Food and Climate, IASD and IFCRI are working on a range of costed plans. They've done one for Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Malawi, and it's trying to kind of bring together these various sectors. So it's achieving affordable, healthy diets, strengthening farmers' livelihoods, as well as climate adaptation and mitigation, including, I think, food waste and greenhouse gas emissions from livestock. And so they're working with the ministries on the ground, trying to wrangle the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Health. And from what I've heard, it's not always an easy process. And I think there have been actual fights in some of these conversations, but it is kind of trying to align these ministries a bit clearer, but also kind of give them high-level recommendations on where they should be putting the money domestically, but also what is the ODA spend that's also needed in order to accelerate this food system transformation, but in this more plural sense. And it's like, it's able to say that I think it's 14 billion is needed for these three countries to achieve food systems transformation, 14 billion a year up until 2030. So I think there is some progress trying to work to bring these together, but I think, yeah, much more needs to be done for sure.
Yeah, I think this is, this point about the kind of counteracting policy is such an important one to consider. And again, I appreciate this goes into some quite broad areas. This isn't just an issue that governments are trying to tackle in developing country context. I know the UK, what was meant to be a very promising UK food strategy that never really became anything, had to go through that process of kind of, in effect, arbitrating across government departments about what mattered, what mattered the most, I suppose, in a way. And there are obviously precedents with some of the kind of whole of government or cross-government public health strategies that have tried to have frameworks that do work across ministries in order to ensure that there is a message about what outcome fundamentally matters and the expectations that matter. I feel like we sort of are heading towards a different phase of the scaling up nutrition movement than in the early exciting days of Sun. But the origins of that and the structures of that were all very much about trying to incentivize cross-government discussions, which fundamentally does speak to this point about needing to have political leadership center in on outcomes that matter and trying to work out how to bring the different parts of that puzzle on board. For sure, it's not a straightforward thing, but I think, again, coming back to this idea of saying, Malawi is a really good example. I think last year we could probably have seen maybe some shifts away from a very heavy focus on maize on the basis that the sheer cost of fertilizer might say, well, look, now it's worthwhile shifting into more diverse production. But that political economy, who's benefiting from the maize industry, is clearly so extraordinarily powerful in that context. But that's where I think this point about the political economy has to come back into it. Who's winning, who's losing, and how to foster a discussion about what is the big win in the long run. And this is a very, very, very tense area. I mean, anything talking about shifting production, export production, and so on in some countries of the world, it's not just a tense political debate. I mean, it is really, it's also mired in violence and quite a lot of challenge. But that's where I think it does come back to this question with political leadership over, do we fully understand the implications of not gripping this properly in terms of the immediate and long-term economic and the broad economic and other impacts that will come, and how do we really hammer that point home as much as we can?
Thank you. So do we have any questions from the room? Any other comments or questions from the room?
I'd like to add a comment, please. I come from Pakistan, and our problem currently is the political turmoil. So a lot of people know that our prime minister is in jail right now. So the way I see it, I'm a pediatrician basically who has interest in nutrition, and I'm working in a private hospital. So what I see is that many government projects are driven through NGOs, and there are aids coming in, and all those aids, they go into the government hospitals. But what happens is with the political turmoil, these grants stop, and all the aids coming to the government hospitals, they also stop. So the way I see it, something gets started, we are on the way, and then all of a sudden it's just gone, and we are back to square one. So I've been thinking, I work in a private hospital, and I think it's been coming to my mind that it would be a good thing if NGOs can partner with the private hospitals, and that way the political situation probably will not affect the activities going on. So for us, like for our hospital, we've started working on indigenous diet for the children, and we're using our own nutrition department to help us, and we have made some impact on children's nutrition. What we're doing is the complementary diets they're already using, we're trying to fortify them, or we're trying to add in stuff to make them more nutri-dense. So for me, maybe this can be a thing which can help in countries like Pakistan or India, maybe, where a lot of projects, nutrition-oriented projects, are run by the governments.
Yeah,
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, it's really interesting to listen to everybody's comments. I was thinking from the perspective, so I work mainly in health research across different types of intervention and health issues. So I'm not like a specialist in nutrition. I'm not feeling clear on like who is the audience for the advocacy efforts, because it feels like when we have a lot of multi-sector kind of activities, then ultimately the audience is kind of the Ministry of Finance, not like the Ministry of Health or the ministries for food and agriculture. And then does the message change according to that person? And then working with the private sector in nutrition, I thought there was really interesting comments as well. And it does seem to me that's where the long-term answer lies. I mean, we've had issues in the MRC in trying to promote partnerships with the private sector, which is that some parts of the nutrition food system are entirely devoted to selling foods that are simply unhealthy. And so it's very difficult to figure out who are you actually aiming at. And I feel like maybe that's what's maybe missing from discussion from someone who's not part of that world, is like, who are you trying to get your message to? Because it's just it feels a bit all over the place.
Yeah, I agree. From this conversation, it's like our problems are much deeper than we sort of probably even thought, because it's just not joined up. We're not cohesive. It's not joined up at the national level, and we're stuck between targets and research. And we all need to be joined up to solve this issue. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and I really want to thank you guys for sharing that experience. So do we have any online questions from the online group before we close the session and move to the next one? Oh, Stephen.
Hello, hi. So as a researcher, this is a very interesting conversation for me, this sort of higher level policy. Just a thought. You've talked a lot about trying to influence ministries of health and the like, as though they are the key players, and also the private sector. What about the kind of public? What about the people? Do we do enough to sort of educate, advocate to mothers, families? This is what you want for your child. Better development, doing better at school, going to grow up and get a job. And do we do enough to create that kind of public demand that then influences the government because they want votes, and then influence the private sector because they want to provide products for what people demand? Is that something we do enough, or is that pie in the sky?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I don't mind quickly coming in it, because I think it's a massive issue that we probably don't do enough of. And I think there's lessons to be learned, for example, from the vaccine world, where people have transformed the way that there is a demand for vaccines or and so Gavi benefits from that demand process coming through there. But I don't think so yes, there's an element of needing to educate, but actually to me it all comes back to this concept of norm setting about, and I think Abby touched on this as well, like what is the overarching outcome that we're looking for? And so how do people then demand that this is the minimal level that they accept, which is healthy foods, healthy products, but also that we try to work with the private sector to set those norms as well, so that they're producing those products. In the short term, you could argue that some companies or some big sections of the private sector are actively campaigning against us educating for better nutrition. And so without double pronging that and working on that collaboratively, I think it's a challenge. But there is certainly a need for, and in most of the work that we do, like in the UK, is to get the demand driving for UK public to demand the UK government does more globally to help on nutrition. But there's definitely elements around norm setting, I think, for people's demands. But again, I'd argue that it comes back to this same point. What are other people doing to try to educate the public on their demand for better social protection projects, better schools, whatever it might be? And how do we agree? Because I think the points you were raising earlier around like stunting's an indicator, wasting's an indicator. I've often thought that like those of us in this room shouldn't consider ourselves nutrition advocates or policy people or researchers. We should consider ourselves people thinking about what children need and how can we make the best for them and how can we work the best for them so that they end up able to survive and thrive. And if nutrition is an issue, where that's a problem, we should be flexing in there. If it isn't, if it's medicines, we should be flexing in there. If it's schools, we should be flexing in there. So how do we bulk in norm setting on nutrition at the level that people demand it? But I think, yeah, if you're not matching that up with affordability, if you're not looking at what things are costing, what products are available, then you're almost creating a myth for people. So I think, yeah, that double prongedness, but again, sorry, so.
Okay. I do think there's a remarkable lack of big campaigns aiming to drive demand for nutritious foods. We have a big one in Kenya where we're aiming to influence the diets of 1 million people, reach 1 million people, and it's increasing consumption of vegetables. And when we started looking for the number of campaigns that you could really build on to do this in those kind of settings, incredibly little precedent to actually build that out. And so most of what we've had to do has been developed from scratch, doing validation with small groups of kind of focus group type of, to get the messaging right and to get the points of communication right as well. But it's alarming to hear what you were saying, that there's less and less resources for that kind of activity, because it's clearly necessary.
That's my final question to this group is, where the new global transitions agenda is upon us, is it going to help the space or our same old? Rethinking food systems, social justice, the whole kind of thing that comes with that. What do we see that as?
Move to a systems view is good.
Okay.
But I think the system, sometimes when we look at systems, whether it's health systems or food systems, we think of it in terms of perhaps the more formal, in health systems is dominated, for example, by the WHO building blocks and inpatient and outpatient care and a touch of community, where it's really systems of health, which is right down at the house. So, most healthcare happens in there, 70% of it, and we just forget that, or we don't. Systems of food and nutrition happen in the whole. So we're rethinking. We need to be redoing, rethinking of what we mean by these systems, and really getting down to context-specific issues and questions, and so that's where the knowledge and the solutions, and what's pragmatic and practical. We can come up with all of these solutions, but then when it trickles down to policies, coherence at a policy level is still, you can write it all in, but it's the doing. And like what you're saying about agriculture and health or whatever, so much when it comes to policy implementation is about the social brokerage and relationships and all of that that makes the world go round. You can write whatever you want in terms of policy coherence, but it will remain a paper exercise unless there's that facilitation and brokerage, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's it. So I think that's the systems needs to look more broadly, and it needs to be more than rethinking. It has to be redoing.
All right, that was, yeah. Okay, that was really interesting. Thank you so much, guys, for that. So I think we can move on to our second session. Oh, we have a hand. Oh, Abby.
I'll be really quick because I know you need to move on. I think, yeah, everything the shift into systems thinking is incredibly important because, it does enable us to unpack the complexity. But the problem with complexity is that it's also the thing that causes people's brains to kind of grind to a halt and not have any idea really where to go and what needs to be done. So of course it's important, and we need to navigate that and to help unpack and simplify the kind of actions that could be taken still within that system consideration and recognizing the links. It's the social justice angle of all of this that I think it would be really, really exciting to look more at, and that links to the comments that Callum and Saul were making, and Stephen's question actually about this issue of really bringing this back into the voices of people and what they can demand. We know there are multiple different ways in which we can get push and pull going around change, but again, I do feel a little bit. The climate change piece is obviously extraordinarily complex and not moving as fast or as far or at all in the way that we need to. But I think the centrality around that from a social justice perspective, it's a growing and growing focus. So how do we get good nutrition, as I said, not a nice to have, but as an essential, as a point of social justice? Is that too ambitious? I think it's something we should be trying to push for, so that the message of what matters to people, it is central to that, and that we gift that back to people, and they can take control of that information and be able to use it, where for quite a long time now it hasn't been in the control of the hands of people who can maybe call for the kind of change that's needed. So I think the social justice side of it would be an interesting one to try and see how we can kind of infiltrate, piggyback on, and make, kind of help to see how it could be more central in that whole debate. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. That was a brilliant way to end this session. So moving on to session 2. Our speakers are all online. So, Bharati, we want to start this session really looking at this intersection, unpacking this intersection between research and policy. So, is Bharati online?
Yes, thank you, Claire, for this important question. And this has been a very interesting discussion. When we talk of stunting and reduction of stunting in the context of India, it's extremely important, and there is a very strong political will for interventions to reduce stunting. The Prime Minister of India has given a clarion call to make India a technology-driven and knowledge-based economy by 2047, which completes 100 years of independence of India. So the 25 years starting from 2022 to 2047 have been labeled as Amrit Kal, and very important issue here is to human capital development is of paramount importance. We need children who are not stunted, which we need children who have better cognitive capacity to lead this development of India towards a knowledge-based and technology-driven economy. So there is very clear political will from the government to reduce childhood stunting, improve early childhood development. But the issues here are that there is very well recognition that childhood stunting as well as development are multifactorial, have multifactorial determinants. India has a flagship program called National Nutrition Mission or Poshan Abhiyan. It has very explicit focus on multi-sectoral convergence, having different ministries and departments work together. It includes Ministry of Health, Ministry of Food and Public Distribution, Ministry of Women and Child Development, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Livelihoods. So there is a very strong understanding that silver bullet on just nutritional interventions will not work. We require a multifactorial approach. There has been recent research from India where interventions started during preconception period and continued till 2 years of age. And when the interventions were integrated, multi-sectoral, including health access to health care, screening and treating of ailments, nutritional interventions, as well as wash interventions, remarkable impact has been seen. So we have the evidence in terms of research, we have the programs in place, but as it has been pointed out in the previous session, implementation is a huge problem. So how to intervene these, how to make the integrated interventions happen at the child level, how to make the frontline workers working in the community work in a coordinated manner and see to it that the programs which are in place are implemented to their maximum potential. I think that remains a big area of research, and I cannot emphasize enough the value of implementation research. Similar to the demand side program related interventions to improve the program delivery, there is also a need for demand side interventions to improve the program uptake by the program beneficiaries. And there is also a component of behavior change communication which is needed so that women and the families understand the importance of improved complementary feeding, having appropriate wash practices so that children do not fall sick quite often. And these both demand side and supply side interventions are needed. And I think there I feel is a big evidence gap. There is also a gap in terms of capacity, researchers' capacity. There is very strong capacity in terms of doing biological research, in terms of doing research, in terms of randomized controlled trials, but implementation research is where the capacity is needed. I think it's not only in India, it's issue everywhere. We do not have our methods which are well developed, and we do not have enough capacity. So I feel there is a big gap in terms of implementation research. And there are issues such as which India as well as other LMICs have to deal with, is that when we implement interventions to reduce undernutrition and stunting, there is a risk of concomitant increase in overweight and obesity. So this is because of the huge increase in the consumption of processed and ultra-processed foods. Our studies from very poor states in the country have shown that even in the poor households, a large food budget goes into purchase of this processed and ultra-processed foods for children because they are seen as convenient foods. And there is also a demand from children because they have some kind of aspirational value because of the advertisement. So there is also research needed for changing consumer preferences, interventions to changing consumer preferences, improving the food choices, and the food system related interventions. So I think these are some of the issues which we need for making our knowledge into practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Bharati. That was really interesting. So our next speaker is Deepak.
Hi, thank you, Professor Claire, and thanks, Professor Bharti, also, while you had set the tone at the national level. What I'm going to reflect is our observations at Gujarat level. And I'm happy to share that along with Hub, we also have Center of Excellence on Nutrition, mid-level training centers for ICDS, and of course, State Resource Center for monitoring of ICDS. There are certain points which I'd like to make. For sure, there is need for research which can generate evidence, and this evidence can actually culminate into policies. However, as Professor Bharti was suggesting and saying, our observation at Gujarat suggests that there has been gap between implementation and outcome. While in Gujarat, the programs are implemented uniformly, but malnutrition still remains an issue. We have large survey data, but this survey data do not represent the scenario below the district level, say for NFHS or NHS data. And therefore, there is a need for dedicated research that suggests that within the districts, the entire Gujarat is not malnourished. The entire district is not malnourished. The entire district is not anemic. There are certain pockets within the districts which are, really some targeted interventions are needed. Government does have a lot of data, but they are hardly used for decision making. While we were working for Hub and SRC and COE, we had certain suggestions for the government in form of positive advocacy for policy formulation, like taking research to undertake prioritization exercise to identify districts and blocks where intensified campaigns can be done. There is a need for targeted research for specific needs and for identifying need for high-risk pocket. And more so, we need to have no policy formulation which is more targeted towards sub-district action plan, which is actually a need of our. And equally true is we need to strengthen the dialogue between researchers and policy makers. There are evidence-based policies which actually can lead to better solutions. At least our Hub understanding says for Gujarat, we need to design differential care models for malnutrition where we integrate the evidence-based findings and of course adopt innovative strategies. We need to implement certain innovations and certain interventions on pilot. We need to process document the models. We need to assess their feasibility, acceptability, and effectiveness as a part of research and ensure that they are scalable, sustainable, and potentially we can actually use this for integration with existing healthcare system, considering the resource requirement and long-term implication of such strategies. One of the important things which I really want to stress now is the challenge in using the existing government data. In Gujarat, it is not only in Gujarat, but across India, it is something like chicken and egg syndrome. They don't give us data because they feel that it's not good. However, equally true is unless and until you give data to the researchers, they'll not be able to give positive suggestions. They'll not be able to identify those gaps so that the data can be strengthened. And therefore, there is a need to develop capacity for deep data analytics within the existing nutritional tracker-based system. So we have Portion Tracker. We need to have a nutrition data analytics unit. At least for Gujarat, what we have been advocating through Hub to the state government is to develop, test, and validate advanced predictive model for malnutrition in Gujarat. We need to investigate underlying mechanism, the pathway to gain insights into complex interplay of the factors. We need to identify risk factors contributing to child malnutrition. Equally true is, if at all, we can have some sort of role of AI and ML, we can really identify the geographical and individual characteristic-based patterns that has a high risk for developing malnutrition. And last but not the least, this will assist us in generating or forecasting a regional pocket where there are potentially high rates of malnutrition and which requires targeted intervention. I'm happy to share that Hub and SRC are in advocacy with the state government. Gradually, we are inching towards gaining their confidence to support us with the data which Hub already have one hand and also the data that has been generated from the Portion Tracker so that we can help government of Gujarat not only in identifying the solutions but also tackling the much issues of malnutrition within the state. Thank you so very much. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Deepak. That was, yeah, that was great. Our next speaker is Babakar.
Hi, good morning again. So I think it's a very important and very interesting discussion since the beginning of this session. So I think we have we can say that at this period, at this time, we all agree that regarding fighting stunting in the African region, we have several progress that we have had since 1919, and this is due to the lot of strategies that we have put in place in our different countries. So we have, for example, at the different Ministry of Health in the sub-region of West Africa, we have policy for fighting disease for mother and child, and we have also several NGO working with different Ministry of Health. So all these things, we can say that we have a lot of we have many how to say many victories with fighting malaria, but fighting malnutrition. But we have several gaps that we have raised in different countries in West Africa. So the problem is still persists in different countries. So the main gap that we have here is we have the disparities of the malnutrition in the sub-region and also in the different countries. So if you look at, for example, Senegal, we have disparities of the malnutrition in different regions. We have most of the prevalence in the region, north region, where we have dryness. We have also a very important prevalence of malnutrition and stunting in the south, far to the capital, and all these aspects is very important to rise and to address by the Minister of Health. So we have also a lack of knowledge about the real causes of malnutrition and stunting in our settings. So we need also to address this different problem. And I think research could very be helpful for the Minister of Health. So one of the major problems that we have in our countries, West Africa countries, is we don't have the effective participation of the population for the policy development. So we have strategies coming from outside, and the Minister of Health try to scale up these strategies in the different countries without having the knowledge or the agreement of the population, and for sometimes it could be very difficult to have very good results by doing this kind of things. So all the problems that we have, we can have in the Africa, West Africa region, is the political crisis. So you know that it's not a very stable region. We have a lot of wars in different countries. We have also political crisis in all the regions. So the consequences are the movement of the population. And for example, in Senegal, we have received some months ago, people coming from Niger with a lot of children having malnutrition, and it is a very great problem that we need to solve by working together with different countries, but also by working with the different NGOs. So the other problem that we can have also is the climate change. We are facing to the climate change in our sub-region. So we know that we have a lot of arid zone with dryness, and it is a very great problem that we have. So it's very difficult to predict or to have a good prediction of agriculture's production, and also to solve the problem. That's why sometimes we have some difficulties to solve the problem of nutrition in our department, in our region. So we think that we need to have a very good discussion, across discussion between different ministries. The fight of malnutrition is located in the Ministry of Health, but we have also several other ministries that can be part to this fight, and we need to have a lot of discussion about the different ministries, and it is a problem in our regions because they don't have very great opportunities to work together. So in Senegal, fortunately, we have at the high level, at the president cabinet, we have a department having in charge malnutrition, and we try to put in place consortium with the different ministries, with the different institutions to work together and to try to find this to solve these problems. That's why it's very important to have this kind of discussion if we want to have good results to fight stunting and malnutrition in our department, in our countries. So West Africa is a very the situation is very difficult due to the different reasons that I have raised before: crisis, climate change, political issues, and I think all these aspects have very great consequences, negative consequences on fighting malnutrition in our different regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So do you is speaking? No. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, Father. Okay. So Umi and Ermi.
Dr. Umi, can you hear us?
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Indonesia. We are joining from Jakarta and Lombok, as you can see here. And I'm glad to introduce to all of you somebody who has been also joining us since the first Action Against Stunting Day on back 2021, Dr. Irma Ardiana, who is the one who will represent the perspective from the policymakers on the evidence priorities from Indonesia. Dr. Irma Ardiana is Director of Infant and Child Family Development from National Population and Family Planning Board Indonesia. We will be sharing our sessions together. So Ibu Irma, please start.
Thank you, Bumi, dear all. Well, thank you for the opportunity given. From the discussion, I think I agree that in the future, the world will experience a global megatrend marked by technological revolution, demographic transition, climate change, international trade, global urbanization, competition for natural resources, high middle class population, geopolitical and geoeconomic dynamics. And I think that this change certainly has an impact on the achievement of global and national development goals in economic, social, and cultural order. In Indonesia is currently in the pace of implementing our National Medium-Term Development Plan 2020 and 2024, which has strategic value as starting point for achieving the vision of Gold Indonesia 2045, and a vision that wants to lead Indonesia to become the country with the 5th largest GDP in the world through economic transformation. In parallel, Indonesia is preparing the National Long-Term Development Plan 2025-2045 as a reference for development for the next 20 years, as well as the National Medium-Term Development Plan 2025-2029. As an embodiment towards Gold Indonesia 2045, Indonesia has noble ideals which are measured through several main indicators. Among others, the poverty rate is heading towards 0%, and inequity is reducing with a Gini ratio of 0.290 until 0.230. And in terms of human resource competitiveness, Indonesia continues to increase its human capital index score to 0.73, And I think for this reason, Indonesia must be able to utilize the enormous basic capital for the development. An abundant productive workforce occupying around 70% of total population, as Indonesia is experiencing demographic dividend, its biodiversity, maritime wealth, cultural diversity, tolerance, and mutual cooperation. One of the stumbling blocks in increasing the human capital index is the still high prevalence of stunting in Indonesia. The prevalence of stunting has continued to decline since 2018 at 30.8% to 21.6% in 2022. Indonesia is currently working to reduce stunting by 3.6% in 2023. And the government, through the Ministry of Health, is currently conducting stunting measurement survey in all districts. And to accelerate the reduction of stunting to 14% in 2024, the government has issued presidential regulation on accelerating stunting reduction, which set 6 objectives, and they are family life planning, fulfillment of nutritional intakes, improving parenting patterns, improving access to and quality of health services, and increasing access to drinking water and sanitation. And also we have 5 pillars or a national strategy that focus on commitment and vision of leadership in ministries, agencies, local or regional governments, and also village government. We also improving behavior change communication and community empowerment. Wants to also increase the convergence of specific and sensitive interventions and issues of food and nutritional security at the individual, family, and also community levels, and strengthening developing system, data, information, research, and also innovation. And we already have established 91 indicators within these pillars. And also we have national action plan that focus on providing data on families at risk of stunting, assistance to families at risk stunting, and also to all prospective brides or prospective couples, and also doing surveillance for families at risk stunting and doing stunting case audit. The presidential regulation also stipulates institutions and their duties in accelerating effort, starting from central, provincial to village level. We have formulated 9 specific intervention indicators and 11 sensitive intervention indicators, which are, we trust that, scientifically proven to have leverage in reducing stunting. We have measured the achievement of those indicators in 2020. Of the 9 specific indicators, exclusive breastfeeding has still not reached the targets of 70%. And the provisions of complementary feeding for children aged 6 until 23 months already reached 4 million children. And of the 11 sensitive indicators, almost all indicators have met the target. The biggest challenge for the achievement of these indicators is the slice of program benefits to the target group. Some of the obstacles faced are that data is still scattered across several sectors, and the use of shared data has not yet been fully realized. The budget commitment to reducing stunting has not been reflected in regional and village planning documents. There are still limited institutions to accelerate stunting reduction in program management that is integrated across sectors and also provides sufficient space for stakeholders. Developing program at the family level also has challenges from geographical aspects, community literacy, culture, and also access to services. Regarding the research space in accelerating stunting reduction, we have large actually modalities. We have wealth of data from census, surveys, and also routine surveillance. We have single body that oversees research, and we have also a platform for collaborative programs between governments and also university. We have local wisdom and services system that has been placed. So there is a high demand from policymakers who understand that there is no one-size-fits-all policy. And we do understand the dynamics of the strategic environment. And I think this is of the demand for further research for this policy making process. So there are some areas, there are some areas currently needed. Are the effectiveness of family-based intervention at risk of stunting reduction. We call it during the incubation period. They are including brides, pregnant women, postpartum women, and under 5 children. Community-based intervention model at the village level to ensure the convergence of program service benefit packages to target group, sustainable food security response to natural disasters and climate change, and the effect of providing social security on children's anthropometry. And I think we also need another aspects of research here about the sustainability of the implementation of local food-based supplementary feeding that started implemented this year, in which the initiative puts also emphasis on local economic activities. The other thing that I like here is about the Internet of Things. I think it already helped us a lot in gathering, processing, analyzing, and presenting strategic information. But data interoperability, I think in Indonesia still very, very challenging, even though we understand that interoperability is needed to obtain more comprehensive information, to also prevent data duplication, to better protect personal data, and to also increase the scope of services required by the target group. And I think that's all from me, and I give the perspective of researchers to Bu Umi. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Irma. So a lot that Ibu Irma shared from the perspective of the policymakers. Next slides is the one that we are doing actually at the Action of Stunting Hub. You see the importance of local wisdom. We are doing the shared values really to identify what we can strengthen from the local wisdom. Once no one size fits all is fully understood, and this will be contribution of the hub from the stunting typology. We fully understand about the convergence of nutrition specific and sensitive, and that will be what we contribute with our whole child approach. And currently in Indonesia, the egg sometimes is included as a social security, and that is what the evidence from our egg intervention will do. As well as the importance of personal data protections as a hub while supporting the open access data, we fully comply to the general data protection, GDPR, and also the country regulations, and we have our data management committee to ensure compliance for personal data protection. In our sites, in Indonesia, we are doing the study in East Lombok, and it is represented by 4 sub-districts. And currently, we are already completing all children, which pregnant mothers were recruited between February to September 21. All has turned 12 months, and we are on ongoing follow-up of their 18 and 24 months. And at the same time, we managed to do the early year study this August, case control of stunted and non-stunted. Slide. And this early year study is a part of contributions besides the egg interventions that we are doing, in which we have 1 every 4 mothers randomly assigned into egg intervention of 3 eggs a day during the pregnancy. This early year study, which is done in Indonesia, is important given that this will allow us to see the peak of stunting at the 24 months of age, in which due to the COVID-19, we had a delay and is not able to do the inline up to the 24 months. And it also allows for the early identification of markers related to stunting, such as epigenetic and microbiome, will provide the sufficient power to see the difference and also, of course, for the capacity building purpose of the team. Next slide. Our team has been already quite toward the end of this cohort study. As you can see here, we are completing all the sample collection of mother, child, and father, and also the same with the analysis, which are for epigenetics, gut health, and nutrition. Slide. And as well, for the food component, we are doing the food environment tools for quite comprehensive nutrient-dense foods, including dark green leafy vegetables, chicken, seafood in the early years, but also to capture the unhealthy foods, including snacks, as we also discussed it from the previous speakers. And currently, we are continuing for the food value chain of the egg, chicken, and fish. Slide. Education and cognition work streams are also completing our assessment for the child development, which is done by the psychologists and enumerators. The siblings, 101 siblings of our cohort subjects were also assessed for their development and also learning environment, stimulation using Easy Home. And we are also assessing the ECE teachers for the learning environment and also doing the qualitative teacher interview for assessing the situation of learning environment of the toddlers. And finally, the shared value that we are doing is meant to strengthen the team as well as the community to better understand the community perspective. And hopefully we are able to capture a lot of different stakeholders' perspective. In 2023, we have been revisiting again the community, and we have heard more from the teachers, from the parents, from the food value chain actors, as well as the local governments. So with that, our studies hopefully are really toward making and producing the outputs, including a contribution of stunting typology, the timely intervention, the best output learning tools and decision support tools. And we really hope that the policy makers will really be able to take up what we are producing from the study by the end of the study and beyond. So thank you for all of your attentions and greetings from Indonesia.
Thank you, Umi. So can we put the virtual audience, the virtual perspectives on the screen together? Or?
Yeah. These are all.
So Babakar, for the discussion, can you put your camera back on?
Dr. Deepak,
and Dr.
Bharati.
And Dr. Bharati. Go ahead, Dinesh. Can you ask Deepak and Bharati?
Dr. Deepak and Dr. Bharati, can you please switch on your camera? Yeah. Dr. Bharati, she had a network. Yeah. Dr. Bharati.
You hear me now? Okay.
Yes, can you put on your camera, please, Babakar?
Okay. So, just to continue for my presentation, and we know that in our region we have policymakers who have a lot of priorities in the different countries. So after having discussion with them, the most thing that they raise is to have sufficient funds to implement the national plans in the different countries. So they have all 5 years planned, but the amount of to finance all these activities are very, very, very high, and they have some difficulties to find these funds. So that's why they say that the first priority is for the government to have sufficient funds to put in place and to scale up all the different strategies that they have in their different 5 years plan. So they also have some other needs like to have innovative and practical ways to provide essential and quality of and continuous services in the different region of the different countries. So the coverage of the different countries by the different health structure is not very good sometimes, and they have several regions without health structure. And in this different region, malnutrition is very, very important, and they need to have also to find solution to cover all these people living in this very remote area. So they also want to put in place the wash and social protection in the different countries and the different region. And this is also the very important aspect of the plan that they have in the different countries. And they they want to have or to work together with different NGOs to finalize all this aspect, because alone our government are not able to do all this aspect. So at the community level, they need also to have a decentralization of the malnutrition management. So a lot of deaths that we have for malnutrition is located in the at the community level, very far to the different cities, and they need to have their strategies and also healthcare to provide management of the nutrition problem there. So one of the things that they need to provide is to strengthen the nutrition education for mothers also and the community players. So they know that due to the difficulties that they have to put in place all the strategies in the different regions, they need to have relay at this level. And for that, the plan is maybe to strengthen the education of the mothers and also the community health workers living in this area, to help the Ministry of Health to fight correctly the and at the end, they also need to reinforce the essential nutrition actions like drinking water, safe water. It is a problem from at this time in at this year. We have some area where we don't have safe water, and they need to have to develop strategies to help these different people living there, having also safe water. Have also to train them about washing hands and before using nutrition for the babies and for the children. And it's very important for the Ministry of Health to reinforce these essential nutrition actions in the different area of the countries. So that's why they ask the universities and the research institute to work closely with the Ministry of Health. So here in Senegal, we have in the different level at the Ministry of Health, we have sometimes research committees working closely with the Ministry of Health to try to help all the different departments to solve the issues that they have in this in the country. And for the research perspective, so we need to get a better understanding of the real determinant of malnutrition using new technologies. So when I say new technologies, is for example molecular biology by using genomics, for example, like in our program with the epigenetic aspect. I think it is a very great opportunities to have good knowledge about the causes of malnutrition in our settings. So also artificial intelligence also is one of the way that we can we can use to solve this problem. And I want to give an example. 3 weeks ago, we have launched a program, a research program with the Ministry of Health by using artificial intelligences in at the Ministry of Health to fight transmission diseases like NTDs, for example. And I think this kind of example could be used to fight malnutrition also. The one thing that I want to highlight is at different level, the Ministry of Health have a lot of data that we have, for example, in Senegal, the DHESD, which is a platform where we collect every day information about health in the different population. For example, we can have the number of malnutrition children having malnutrition in the different level in the region. So we need all this data can be used to predict, for example, the situation of malnutrition in a different region, also to predict crisis, the impact of the crisis, the political crisis, the social crisis, the environmental crisis also. All these things could be used to predict and to have a very resilient program at a different level to fight malnutrition in our different countries. That's why the relationship between Ministry of Health and the different other ministries and also research institute is very crucial for our countries to, if we want to fight with a very good, in a very good manner malnutrition in our different countries.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Babakar. That's wonderful. So does anybody in the room have any questions for our virtual audience? So we've got Umi, Bharati, Babakar, Irma. Is there anybody here with some questions?
Thank you. I have a question for Dr. Irma. I thought that was a really interesting presentation, and in many ways, Indonesia is absolute model of having a very systematic set of policies and guidelines about how you tackle stunting. But it does make me wonder, my question to you is, who are the voices for integrating this into a wider vision? Who is asking to look also at the double dividends on other problems that Indonesia might have? So if I look into the future for Indonesia, it looks like a time bomb for obesity to me. Everything that you see about the food environment and food behaviors is going to lead to huge prevalence of obesity and non-communicable diseases. So who are the voices who are pushing for these programs to take a double view of stunting and obesity, or stunting and environmental issues, which are such a big issue for Indonesia as well?
Dr. Umi, you're on mute. Irma is on mute.
Okay, I think thank you for the questions, and I think it's very relevant questions regarding to the Indonesia's condition currently. And yes, we have also dealing with obesity. The percentage is also increasing if you look at the data. And about the non-communicable disease, we probably quite a difference probably with other countries in managing stunting reduction, that mostly probably in others stunting reduction is probably mainly under the coordination of Ministry of Health. But in Indonesia, I think it is quite different in terms that we have a very specific handicap in ensuring that so many programs that come up from provincial, central, and also village government. The question is how to ensure that the benefit package of the programs are delivered to the target groups. And since my organization, National Population and Family Planning Board, have quite a big what we call family planning field workers, around 13,000 at the grassroots level. So the strategic point then that with that numbers, the president also the president thought that in ensuring all those programs are enjoyed by the families and then goes to BKKBN. But actually in this project concentrating on stunting, our organization is more coordinating all sectors and at all layers of governments. But the issue of obesity and other diseases, I'm sure that it is mostly taken care of by the Ministry of Health. Probably in this area, in my organization, we collaborate with Ministry of Health in terms of giving more educations, IAC programs, behavior change communication programs, and we ensure the functioning referral system that from bridging community services to facility-based intervention. Probably Bu Umi would like to add some more.
Yeah, I think this has been the awareness of our Minister of Health. Currently, I can also mention that there is already a guideline on the national movement to reduce the obesity rate called Gerakan Nusantara Tekan Angka Obesitas or Gentas, and that is, I think, the way to really create the awareness of this overweight. At the same time, we are still struggling also for stunting reduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Are there any other questions in the room for me, Babacar, and Prati? Okay, thanks, guys. I think we're running a little late, and I think, you know, from the first session, it was clear that there was this real disconnect around implementation, and you guys have spoken to that a little bit, but it would be nice to unpack that a little bit more, perhaps in like the last session, we can get back to that in terms of way forward. But thank you very much. We're
So do you want to delay the lunch by about 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll gather here again at another 30 minutes.
So my name is Kate. I work at Results UK, and I also provide the secretariat for the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Nutrition for Development. So Results is a purely advocacy organization, and between that and the APPG, I'm going to be sort of focusing on the UK context and the different things that we can do to get past what we see as some of the biggest barriers for policy solutions for global nutrition, which is greater engagement from the sector with the public and directly with politicians and parliamentarians. So sort of like what Saul said earlier about raising the profile of nutrition and stunting in implementing countries, we also really need to do that in the UK context as well. These groups are a key link between the policies themselves and then those in government who set agendas and budgets to actually be able to implement the policies and programs. Our APPG co-chairs and members have been really keen to keep pushing for a greater role for the UK in ending global malnutrition in all its forms. And as that group really wants to focus on solutions, like some of the ones that we've talked about today, and bringing more energy back into the political debate on nutrition and international development. Because, as we all know, various challenges over the last few years, budget cuts, COVID-19, subsequent backslides, plateaus on the development progress,
the space has become a bit defeatist and seemingly harder to make. I see Callum smiling because he very much understands. It's been a bit harder to make meaningful headway with this parliament. And then the cost of living crisis and impending general election has also led many parliamentarians to turn their focus domestically, with little time or interest in advocating for development. So to regain this parliamentary energy, it's really important that parliamentarians actually understand what malnutrition is in all its forms, and also just how foundational nutrition is. Our chairs consistently talk about how many parliamentarians don't actually understand the differences between nutrition and hunger, or how critical it is to other development projects. For example, at the end of this August, Results UK took a delegation of parliamentarians to Kenya to learn about child health programs. And MPs were really surprised to learn that health workers delayed routine immunizations to malnourished children and instead insisted on waiting until the child had been treated for malnutrition before proceeding to make sure that the vaccinations were actually effective. While this might seem obvious or sensible to us, it's a level of detail that most parliamentarians will never have had to consider. So similar to parliamentarians, like what Callum was mentioning earlier about members of the public who are unaware of how important nutrition is and have no idea what sort of strange sounding medical terms like stunting or wasting mean. For example, this week I got in touch with one of Results UK's longest serving volunteers, Jill. And when I asked Jill about stunting, she started talking about the campaign she'd done, like Enough Food for Everyone If, and standing in Parliament Square with placards. She thought I meant stunts, not stunting. And that's someone who has been volunteering in the space for over a decade. So we can see that there really is a big push that we need to be doing here. When we did clear up that it was a nutrition issue, Jill noted that people don't get that, and so that they contribute to famine relief, but not to ongoing things that have a more detrimental effect long-term and cause damage. So if the public doesn't understand what these distinctions are, it's up to us to bring that knowledge to the fore and to empower people to advocate for more progress on these goals. But with approximately 3 million people in the UK malnourished or at risk of malnutrition, we can't just assume that the case for greater UK involvement in ending stunting and malnutrition abroad is going to make itself. About half of Britons believe that the UK has a moral duty for aid and development, but 61% believe that development takes money away from domestic needs, and only 26% say they care about healthcare, clean water, and hunger in developing countries. I don't think there's data for how much people care about stunting because I don't think they know what it is. But within that 26%, we really need to focus on growing that, because this is one of the biggest barriers to building political will in the UK and getting politicians to mobilize to secure government interests, prioritization, and funds for development policies and programs. So education, bringing the public along with us, and really building solidarity between communities at home and abroad is very critical. When parliamentarians and our APPG members hear these informed arguments and reasoning from their own constituents and see that the public really care about this topic, and not just famine relief, but the long-term nutrition interventions, this makes a massive difference in the parliamentarians' ability and willingness to then go advocate for these policies and programs in government. There really is an appetite among the public to know more and to do more, so it's up to us as a sector to help them find ways to do that. Thank you, and look forward to further discussion.
Oh, thank you. So I think Jack is back with us now.
Hi, yes, I am. Sorry about that. We've had a security update recently and it didn't like Zoom, so it took me a while to get in. Apologies.
Not a fire alarm then.
Not a fire alarm, not yet anyway. Is this for my opportunity to take the floor?
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, thank you, thank you. Is it okay if I share some slides? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. It's good to see the backdrop of LIDC. It's making me very nostalgic. For those who don't know, I used to work at the global panel upstairs. Okay. Could everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Firstly, thank you to the Action Against Stunting Hub for organizing the 3rd annual Action Against Stunting Day. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. straight from Abu Dhabi, representing the UAE presidency. As I'm sure many of you know, our current food systems are not fit for purpose. Not only are they impacted by climate change, they are also accelerating the pace of change. Climate change poses a significant threat to stunting, whether through reductions in agricultural yields and nutrient availability, water scarcity, or displacement and conflict due to climate-related disasters. There's some statistics on the screen here, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Food systems account for roughly 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, 820 million people are hungry, 3 billion can't afford a healthy diet, and 148 million children suffer from stunting globally. There's no path to achieving the Paris Agreement, significant improvements in stunting numbers, or the SDGs without addressing the food systems and climate nexus. For these reasons, the COP28 UAE presidency has identified food systems as one of its top priorities of its presidential action agenda. We have an ambition to deliver an historic moment for food systems so it can secure its place in our common efforts to address climate change and achieve the SDGs. To underpin this ambition, the COP28 Food Systems and Agriculture Agenda is advancing a novel platform with 4 pillars of action. The first pillar is the national level action and is the center of our efforts. It will aim to enhance the linkages between food and climate through the Emiratis Leaders Declaration on Food and Climate. The declaration has 2 purposes. The first is to offer an opportunity to raise ambition and signal support across food systems to advance the achievement of the Paris Agreement while enhancing food and nutrition security, livelihoods, adaptation and resilience, as well as advance interlinked agendas and targets of the SDGs. The second purpose is to act as a chapeau for a package of complementary efforts on food systems and climate action, innovation and investment at COP28 from countries and non-state actors. We're inviting all member states to sign this declaration at the level of head of state and government, and a core intention of becoming a signatory is to include food systems in NDCs, NAPs, and NBSAPs by COP30 in Brazil. To support this, we're developing the technical tools that will enable countries to include food systems and agriculture into their NDCs, as well as developing a training package for negotiators. Pillar 2 is for the non-state actors and the agents of change. We want to demonstrate that there is non-state actor leadership and action taking place in key areas of food systems. Under this pillar, we have a flagship initiative, the Landscape Action Agenda on Regenerative Landscapes. It consists of the most influential non-state actors committed to scaling transformation by accelerating existing efforts and identifying new collaborative landscape-level opportunities that positively impact soil health, biodiversity, and farmer livelihoods. Pillar 3 is innovation, and we're working closely with the Innovation Commission, led by Michael Kramer, a Nobel laureate, and also the UAE-US-led initiative Aim for Climate. And in this pillar, we want to identify 5 to 8 innovation bundles that are ready to be scaled. Some examples of frontrunners in this pillar include weather forecasting and early warning systems, climate resilient cash transfers to smallholder farmers, rainwater harvesting, and digital agriculture. By COP28, we want to announce innovation bundles that have country interest, identified implementing partners, pathways to scale, committed financial support, and strong scientific evidence backing them. There are many agricultural innovations available, but the difficulty lies in delivering the most effective innovations at scale to those who need them the most. To address this gap, we want to identify evidence-based innovations that reach hundreds of millions of climate vulnerable people and smallholder farmers. Pillar 4 is the finance component. We're developing a new structured finance project, the Food Systems Financing Accelerator, which will unlock institutional investors' capital and redirect it to climate-friendly food systems projects in climate-vulnerable countries without raising the debt burden of the host country. We're also identifying pilots between concessional funders to coordinate their grant-making efforts to support technical assistance in climate-vulnerable countries. As we know, as well as food systems and nutrition being traditionally underfunded, when they do get funding, it is often restricted to certain areas. So, for example, one philanthropy might put $100 million, but only be able to spend it on food loss and waste, and not across the entire food system. And we'll be looking to change that with our Pillar 4 on finance. Through positive action across these pillars towards climate mitigation, adaptation and resilience, food and nutrition security, and livelihoods, we also hope to see significant reductions in stunting numbers globally over the years to come. In closing, I would like to thank you all for your time, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks very much. Okay, so our next speaker is
Marie.
Marie.
Thank you. It's been so rich learning and hearing from everybody. So I'm going to share a few reflections and then react a little bit maybe to what I've heard off the cuff. In terms of what has worked and not in terms of policy pathways, it's already been touched on quite a lot, is I think it's been hampered by disconnect between policies, and I'm thinking particularly around wasting or acute malnutrition initiatives, policy and practice. At ENN, we did a review of policies looking at the extent to which wasting and stunting policies were integrated. And a couple of years ago in India, Yemen, Pakistan, South Sudan, Mozambique, and Madagascar. And the silos were present, and sometimes there was often same language or different language describing the same issues, very common pathways, and not necessarily connected at a policy level, or when they were, it didn't trickle down to what happened on the ground. So, you know, what we've been speaking about here, and really not looking at the interplay, the interconnections and the collaborations. And another example, sort of real time at the moment now, is the Global Action Plan on Child Wasting, which is a cross-UN initiative. And there are 23 front-runner countries around the world, and there are operational roadmaps being developed in countries with UN, particularly UNICEF, supporting national governments come up with their plans. And so I took in Ethiopia as an example, and I went into their operational roadmap and I had a look, and they looked at what are the policy environment at country level, then what are the accelerators. And the only policy that was referred to was the National Food and Nutrition Strategy that was considered a relevant policy. Yet there's a Dakota Declaration and a plan to 2030 around stunting that is so aligned, and it was not examined. And then I had a read through the entire operational roadmap, and there's not a mention of stunting. So I did a little, word search, and it came up, "You have not found what you are looking for," was the message. And I thought, I just need to put that up on a slide.
We really haven't.
No, we haven't. And, so there's a missed opportunity, but it's not an opportunity that hasn't been missed yet. So we really need to look at how do we practically connect and convene and align around these. And we talk about connections between, say, wasting and stunting, often at policy level, but it happens. It is really an intimate connection on the ground when it comes to risk. We're doing work at ENN, long-standing connection between wasting and stunting and risk, concurrent in a child. So they don't happen as separate things. A wasted child is more likely to be stunted. Through that process, we've seen sometimes they recover in terms of wasting, but they don't their height goes down. So they're intimately connected. And we treat all these we see these stunted children as a homogenous group. They're not. There's a whole level of interplay that's as manifesting as risk. And a baby who is born low birth weight is often born stunted and wasted, and then they become more so, and they are born with risk. And the connection with low birth weight and stunting is really intimate. And as our friend from Indonesia was describing, I had a quick look about policy and low birth weight, and there's a 2023 Nutrients publication from Indonesia looking at policy, the low birth weight policy, and they're mentioned stunting. So there are connections happening at research and policy, but it's often not manifesting at country level. And what we're doing at the moment in Ethiopia is testing an integrated care pathway for what we call small and nutritionally at-risk infants under 6 months. And we have a broad chart of how they may be wasted, they may be underweight, low birth weight. We have a broad chart of criteria to identify those at risk of poor outcomes. And then we're looking at leveraging integrated management of childhood illness, maternal mental health, etc. But we're not saying, well, that's a wasted child, so they're going to get that sort of thing, and that's an underweight. And we don't actually include stunted as a criteria because it's a nightmare indicator to measure. in practice, in health facilities, and particularly in infants under 6 months of age. What we're concerned about is, what do you do about it, and what is the outcome? It's the shared outcome. And we're finding as well that underweight is a key indicator to identify kids at the most at risk of death. We found that through secondary analysis of ours. WHO are going to be publishing soon a big pool data analysis looking at risk stratification, underweight, and underweight picks up children who are wasted and stunted together, who are concurrently wasted and stunted, who really have an high excess mortality. So it makes me then think, what do we do about this? And I think in terms of focusing on stunting and advocacy, and what you were saying, well, you want to go on stunts, and I love that, because does she really need to know about stunting? Are we too focused on the label? And that is a problem. We've got low birth weight, wasted, underweight, it just adds complexity. What matters is what you do, not what you call it. And I wonder sometimes that once we introduce, and I'm not just saying it's for stunting, but it's for wasting and everything, when we introduce another word and another thing, it becomes, competitive and combative, and it's another priority. And when it comes to advocacy, what about undercover advocacy? What about you go into the table, and we've been doing this with Mammy, where we labelled our integrated care as Mammy, and sometimes people like it and sometimes it turns people off because they go something else and it's another intervention. We don't care what you call it, and sometimes you go around the table and you don't mention stunting, but what you focus is on what you want done and how, and you listen to what their priorities are, and you see how you can not add to their priorities but contribute and help. And when it comes to a child approach, I think with politicians, they need to be treated like children. I'm not saying that in a condescending way, but in terms of simplicity. And actually, if you want to convince your child to do something, you sometimes sell it to them that what you want them to do is what they want to do. And it doesn't matter that, the end justifies the means, and you hide the vegetables in the stew and you don't tell them they're there. So we need to look, I think, at more savvy, undercover intelligence, rather than adding to the clamour and just infiltration. I think in terms of ways forward, I think then there is something around terminology and maybe loosening our grip on the word stunting and really speaking to functional outcomes and seeing the end justifies the means in terms of being undercover. And I'm not saying either or, a combined effort. I spoke earlier just about the functional targeting and what do we really mean by nutrition outcomes. And then I think most fundamental, and again, it's been touched upon so much, is countries being in the driving seat of what influences policy. What is it? What is the evidence and the knowledge they have? What is it they need? How can we learn? And there have been exemplar case studies on stunting reductions and trying to examine why that was. And they're so helpful, but I think real-time evaluation, because, things happen and then people go, gosh, that was interesting, or not, I wonder how that happened. And everyone is looking back and all the rest of it, doing real-time process evaluations, that looking at not just the measurable, but the invisible things that we know make the world go round. And I think it would be very interesting in terms of pathways of change and policy development, would be to do research and investigation of pathways of policy change. Are there some examples you can look and dig in? So Indonesia, India, or whatever, where there's been change or where they've tried to affect change, examining in depth, how did that work or not, for whom, what can we learn from it? So pathways to policy will be really, really interesting to do. And I think another just gap, I think, in the pathways around stunting and more broadly in outcomes has been the lack of attention to maternal nutrition and health, women and maternal nutrition and health, and within that, adolescent. And in the framing, there's often the caregiver, and there's a distinction between the mother and the caregiver. There is nutrition and health involved, and we pay lip service. And we have found in our infants under 6 months work, we treat the mother-infant pair together, and we've embedded maternal mental health, physical health, etc. in together. Now, it is not easy. There's huge challenges. You try and go to an under 5 clinic, and you say, look, ask the mother, they go, well, that's not my remit. That would happen in the UK. They say, this is pediatric services, go to whatever. And we say, well, how do we navigate then? How do people make that work, and how might you connect? So I think the maternal piece and the women's health and nutrition needs to gain elevation. And just finally, I think prevention of stunting, there's different interpretations. It's a spectrum, the prevention of it happening, and it's prevention of the negative consequences of it. And so, you know, we need to use those entry points of those as well who are at risk, who are now at risk and are furthest behind. How do we mitigate those risks? And then how do we prevent it ever happening? And we need to join forces on that.
Okay, Terry, last but not least.
Yes, so I see we've got 5 minutes left, so.
Yeah, well, don't worry, we'll have a very quick wrap up.
I know quite a few people have got to go, including me, actually. But I'll try it and race through some of the points that I wanted to make in response to the questions, sort of, and I'm going to be really brief and maybe provocative as well.
Oh, excellent.
So, in your opinion, what has worked, what hasn't worked? So, I wanted to highlight 2 things that have worked. Advocacy is great, and I know Kate and Callum, Matilda and others will know that I frequently say how important it is, you know, working for SCDO. Advocacy really does make a difference. Please carry on. And what else has really worked, and it was something I was talking to with my neighbour, is the school meals campaign. That seems to be the most successful outcome of the Food System Summit. And that's really challenging for us in FCDO because, you know, in our view, there's not enough evidence that shows that investing in school meals delivers nutrition outcomes. Yes, it's a social protection intervention, but, you know, they've been incredibly successful in drumming up attention for it, and it's politically attractive, and it wins votes in this country and in high burden countries as well. And I think we need to learn about why that's been so successful. So moving on to what hasn't worked. Jack, I think one of the frustrations we have about the food system's focus is there's too much focus on how food is produced and not enough on consumption and diets. And we really hope that the Food Systems Day at COP28 will include a focus on nutrition, and I'm really pleased that I know that my team has been working with GAIN, and there's now going to be a focus on climate and nutrition at 10 AM on the 10th of December. My colleague made me mindfully put that point in. I think there's also really unhelpful debate about, and some of you may have heard, you know, the debate between Rory Stewart and David Miliband about whether cash on its own delivers better nutrition outcomes or cash with specific nutrition interventions. From a policy perspective, having that sort of debate is just really not helpful. It'd be really great to have, I mean, yes, debate about what works is useful, but it's not great having ministers listening to that sort of debate. They like simple answers, and it would be really good to have some more research on that. And the last one, I think, and I think I'm really echoing points that have been made by Marie just now and others throughout the day, is that, you know, focusing, I think, multi-sector nutrition plans, have they been successful? What we really need is nutrition to be integrated right across every other sector plan. And I know it's not either or, but sometimes I think there's too much focus on a nutrition plan and not enough focus on the nutrition actions that the health sector plans to take, the food sector plan. So I'm rushing through this bit. Barriers. Now, I guess my big point is I wonder if what we need to do is to make an ideological argument. And essentially that, you know, there should be more government intervention in our food system. And part of that is about financing, part of that is about, you know, banning food that's bad for you, taxing sugar and alcohol and so on. And I'm not sure we've won that argument. I think when it comes to the public health messages, we have won the argument.
And people and private sector and government all accept that the government has to intervene to protect people from unhealthy product, things that are, medicines that are bad for them and so on, or they have to tax things that are really, alcohol. But when it comes to food systems, I'm not sure we have won that argument. And I think more and more from what everybody's been saying today, I think there is a market failure in that if you leave people to make their own minds up, or the market to work without any government interaction, people make the wrong decision. They don't choose vegetables, they choose a pack of crisps or whatever. So that, can we work together to sort of try and make that ideological argument that there does need to be more intervention in the food system? And I think it's not just that I know, it's not just about making that argument with government, it's about making the argument, as Callum pointed out and others, it's about making that argument with consumers, with the private sector and others. Right, I'm rushing on to my next point. So I think if you sort of accept that there does need to be more intervention, and that does need more finance, and that's really tricky coming from FCDO when we've had our budget slashed. But we are, working really hard to think about how we can deploy other finance. And I think I wanted to sort of finish up with some other suggestions about how research could really help with that. And I think particularly on climate, if we can marshal the evidence that shows that investing in nutritious outcomes, actually we can prove that it mitigates climate change or it helps people to build resilience, adapt to climate change, then it will be so much easier to access climate finance for investment in nutrition. And I haven't found, and we've been looking, we haven't really found that specific bits of evidence. And when we look at our own investment of our own aid budget, what there is of it, we see that there's very little that's invested in things that can be counted as climate and nutrition. But we do need more data and more evidence that shows that those two things really work together. And I'm going to stop there because I've said quite a lot already, but I hope I've provoked some conversation. And I should have said at the beginning, and I was in such a rush, I just want to say thank you so much for a great day. It's been really fantastic to listen to everybody, and I'm really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, I was actually going to say it's been absolutely fascinating, and what we realize is that it's just brought up these whole bunch of issues that we can't resolve in a day. And that would it be helpful for this group, and we can add in others, to kind of take this forward quarterly and see if we can start to collect and implement change. Because there's too much that's been written in this room that we could collectively address that might be able to shift the dial a little bit. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to. We could have monthly or quarterly meetings at LIBC. We can give ourselves a name to talk about these issues around child stunting, child nutrition, how food systems change, and how do we get these dialogues and narratives to link up to support change. So that we would love that, and I would, because we've just scratched the surface. And if we could take this further, I think we could probably together have a bigger voice for change. So yeah, we'll send you out some kind of, we'll start talking about what this would look like, and if you guys are interested in joining, and obviously everybody's super busy, but where are our quick wins? What do we think as a group we could identify some quick wins? What do we think that we need to really ensure isn't happening down in the field? Bringing in our country colleagues too, to get some very good down level support and understanding of what's happening in the field. And I think we could have quite an interesting dynamic group going together. So
can I just say something? It just made me suddenly think something you said, and then some others have said. There was talk earlier on about equity and social justice, and climate keeps coming up at country level, whatever. And there's that whole thing around climate justice. And I'm on the periphery of it, but I know there's a group, and I know sort of Mary Robinson, who was the former president of Ireland and then was big UN, is very involved in this whole climate justice, and how those affected by climate change are often the ones of the least architected and have control and make it happen. And those who are undernourished, at most at risk, are most affected by this. So there might be something that connects in equity social justice and climate justice linked to this whole thing, there might be a hook there. Just
we can learn from other sectors. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to respond actually to that concern, we are working on the climate justice for nutrition campaign ahead of COP. So with the report linking climate and nutrition with the social justice and environment aspect. So if you're interested both in the launch and the report, so I will share my email address to you.
Amazing, what a great day. Go ahead, Charlie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to touch back on the social justice aspect that was mentioned, or there's something one of the speakers had said, which was when you're talking about a language around nutrition, especially stunting, and you're trying to get social justice too, it's important to incorporate youth. And what we've realized is, in terms of this question, what the pathway to success, what we've realized at Fightback is by incorporating youth and sharing their lived experiences with policy makers and with politicians or those behind the scenes, you can, a lot of the time, have a lot more success, because if you can get young people as a lobby to get behind what you're saying, they will not only lobby in their own circles, but they will also share their lived experiences, which are a lot more powerful than a lot of the policy and a lot of systems language and a lot of the conferences that are going around that politicians are already very much aware of. At Buyback, what we've realized is that we can't win young people over with systems language, just doesn't work. Can't win them over with talking about nutrition, doesn't work. Big Food has spent the last 30 years building a narrative around greens and vegetables. That's what young people associate healthy food with, or even the word nutrition with. So how do you work to build that back? And so what we do instead is we try to speak to young people and say, look at your high street, look at the injustices, look at young people in the UK. We are the shortest young people, we have the shortest height in the entirety of Western Europe. Young people in the most disadvantaged areas in the UK die 10 years younger than their more affluent peers. And when you start to give this statistic to young people, when you empower them, you inspire them, or you show them that the food options that you're having on your high street, you think are healthy, are actually not healthy. And all of these food companies are all owned by 10 companies that control 90% of the world's food supply. You start to build them into a narrative and you start to build them into a campaign. That's when they galvanize and support. So I think like one message from me in this really long-winded way of what I'm trying to get at is basically saying language is very important, but especially like in exposing injustices, which tends to happen a lot more in our work, and which we often brush up, just using high-level technical policy, distant language.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thank you to the group. Let's think about how we can take this further, and we'll get back to you.
One comment online, the Q&A.
Oh, Rose.
Rose says, great to hear from Marie. Yeah, Chelsea, can you read it out?
Rose has said, what a great comment, just to comment, what a great to hear from Mari. What matters is what you will do and looking at makers of risk to nutritional outcomes and not just adding another label of the outcomes. So not so much questions, but just agreeing. Thank you very much.
I want to thank everyone. Thanks for our audience for today. It was a really interesting conversation. We've picked up the pieces of something that I think we could politically, collectively move forward on and implement change. Thank you for our virtual audience. It was absolutely brilliant hearing from what's happening in the countries. And thank you to the teams that have been effectively having watch parties on this policy debate. So hopefully this is the first of many, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire from India team. Yeah, thanks.
So, look at your people.